Hey, hello, this is Shah from the podcast Thrive, Not Survive After Child Abuse, which is episode number 35. Maybe you have missed me a few days, or maybe not. Who knows, right, with these things. But yeah, I've been out for 2 days and I couldn't record. I just, had a little thing, just a migraine. Nothing special, nothing to worry about. And so I was a little bit off the air, but I'm back. So with another episode of Thrive, Not Survive After Child Abuse. Our last episode, which is obviously number 34, we talked about make from your mess your message. And today I actually want to repeat or go maybe a little bit deeper into something that we have done before here. And it is, coming from what you hear now lately a lot, specifically on social media, is you need to love yourself first before you can love someone else. Now, that sounds like a really good thing to do, but I got a little bit of comments, but maybe the last time that I talked about it on Instagram Live, I called that bullshit. That's maybe not a nice thing to say, but that's what I said, because I honestly think, I don't want to come back on that, but I just think maybe want to nuance a couple of things in this. Of course, you need to, I'm not saying that you should not love yourself. I'm just saying you should not love yourself first before you can love someone else. Right? There's no, so maybe I was not clear there, because of course you need to love yourself, but you should not love yourself first before you can love someone else. And the reason that I gave is actually, with what do you measure that? Whether you love yourself enough to love someone else, right? I mean, if you do it on a scale of 1 to 10, is it at level 5 you're ready to love someone else, or is that level 8? Yeah, and what does that mean then, right? So I don't think that's really helpful to give someone advice. It just really sounds really good, right? You need to love yourself first before you can love someone else. Actually, it's almost like the other way around, right? If you are in a relationship, it could be a friendship, could be a romantic relationship, the other person will give you feedback. And feedback in the sense like, hey, I don't like so much, or I like what you do now, I like what you say, I don't like so much what you say. So your constant feedback with each other. It doesn't always have to be verbally, but if you know each other well enough, you kind of know how well you do, so to speak, in the relationship, right? So, and it's only through that feedback that you can learn how to grow your love for the other person, or how you can embed it if you choose to do so, right? If you say, man, I don't care how you, what you think about what I do, that's a choice too. But in essence, through your relationship, you learn actually better how to love. Does that make sense? And that's why I say don't love yourself first before you love someone else. Start just building a relationship. Doesn't immediately have to be a romantic relationship. Could be a friendship, could be siblings, could be with your parents. But the moment you come into a healthy interaction where you have healthy feedback, actually you grow into that relationship, and hence you also grow in the love within that relationship. That's the reason why I said that. But lo and behold, because I was, on this topic already, I did some masterclasses, some business masterclasses, and one of the topics that I addressed there is how to become an expert in anything you do, right? And you don't have to be like a PhD expert. Just if you are a little bit better than someone else, you can already help the other person, right? It doesn't have to be. You don't have to be very far out in where you are before you start helping someone else, right? So that's what I mean, So take it a little bit in loose terms. If you want to be an expert in anything, then you can be, as long as you are ahead of some. Well, if you want to turn it into business, maybe there needs to be a little bit more to it. But if it's just helping someone else, right, you could be just one step forward, step ahead. What I always like, and I do this, the people that are listening to the podcast and not watching this, it's a little bit hard to see, but if you're just one step ahead of someone, you can actually really reach out backwards and then ask for the other person's hand, and then you can actually pull that someone alongside with you. If you are miles ahead, maybe you're an excellent teacher, but sometimes then you are a little bit disconnected with the people that you want to help. So therefore there is a very strong trend in education where people actually are more look for specialized help, right? People who actually been through something and not only know it from a theoretical point of view. There's a place for that too. But let me give you an example in my own field where I try to empower people who've been through child abuse. And the reason why people want to listen to me is because I've been through it myself. Right? That doesn't mean that I can replace everything that, for instance, a therapist does, but there is definitely more room, and I believe there needs to be more room in the healing of someone who is struggling with child abuse. Does that make sense? So let's not battle that, I don't have a PhD in how to counsel, because I don't, right? But I have a lifelong of studying this, so so that's a little bit what it is. So we could help each other. So hence I call myself a coach and never a therapist. There's room for both of us. Does that make sense? Anyhow, let's go back to that topic. You need to love yourself first before you can love someone else. And in that perspective, in the context of becoming an expert, actually, if you want to become an expert, there is definitely that first phase where you need to do some self-development. Maybe listen first to other experts first before you start to go out there and talk about things. But then at some point in time, you need to switch your mindset from self-development to contribution. You need to switch your mindset from self-development to contribution. And it's only through that process that you can become an expert. Now, this topic today is not about becoming an expert, but remarkable, you see the same thing here as with, trying to find love for yourself through a relationship. It's only when you start to serve the other person, right? When you build a good relationship, you are in service of the other person. Does that make sense? So if we have too much focus on self-development, right, we might get into some sort of a mode that we need to be perfect first. Now, to my knowledge, there is no one perfect, and if there's one, then it's maybe me, because I'm pretty close to it. Well, of course, that's a little joke, right? No one is perfect, and if you start to measure yourself with something really perfect, you would never have a relationship, or you would always feel not worthy enough to be in a relationship, right? So just knowing that there's always work in that is always a better thing to do. Now, talking about perfect, if you have listened enough to this podcast, then you know that most of my inspiration is coming from someone that's called Jesus, right? And that doesn't have to be your belief or your religion. You can still listen to my podcast, please do, right? And I'm not trying to convince you in that direction. But interesting enough, and you find this, by the way, also back in other great teachers in the world, right? If you only see Jesus as a teacher, then this podcast would already serve you really well, right? And he teaches us levels of how to love, right? Jesus was all about love. If you know something about him, if you just see him as an example, then at least take this away, right? He was all about love. The first level of love is the love that you have for God. So if you believe in God, you have a certain respect and love for God, right? That's his first level. Like I said, if that's not something for you, that's good. But the second one is what Jesus said, is love your neighbors as you love yourself. He didn't say love yourself first before you love your neighbors. No, you need to love your neighbors as you love thyself, or love yourself. Then the third level that he's doing is love one another. And he gave as an example, as I loved you. In other talks, I probably allude a little bit more why he added as I loved you, but here again, love one another. And then the last level he talks about is, and that's probably the hardest one to do, is love your enemies, right? And so in none of these teachings about love, right, he says you need to love yourself first. And it's very remarkable that you see that also in books of Tao and Buddha. You see these all teachers about love. You never see first you need to love yourself first. Something happened. If I have to estimate it, it's probably late 50s where we get a little bit more emphasis on us as an individual, which is not a bad thing, but maybe we sometimes take it a little bit too far. At least that's what I believe, right? So if we only focus on self-development first instead of serving the other or contribution for another person, maybe we miss something really important in that spectrum of love. So why do I say that? Because there's one thing that I see more and more is that we see a little bit stronger divide in society when we have a different opinion. You can clearly see that. I live in the United States. I become a U.S. citizen, right? So hence I can now also vote. Well, that's a while already, but I can now also vote for the U.S. president. And if you know anything about the U.S. Election that's coming up, November, right? November 3. The 3rd of November, that's when the official election ends. That's the last day. But because of the current situation, we have now what we call pre-selection. So the discussions are going on, and that's good. In campaigns, it's perfect if you fight these discussions hard. But if you see that people start to disrespect each other or even break friendships, long life friendships because someone votes something else than you vote, I'm not too sure if that's a good thing. Actually, I think it's a bad thing for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a democracy, and in a democracy we have freedom of speech and we have freedom of voting. Now, of course, you also have the freedom to break off a relationship. I don't dispute that. By the way, you do have that freedom. I just don't think it's a wise thing to do, right? It's the fact that we can have a different opinion. That's the reason why we have why we have democracy, and I think it's a beautiful thing, by the way, if you have a different opinion. Now, maybe you have some boundaries how far that different opinion could be, but that's for everyone, of course, different, right? If if it becomes about maybe racism or something, and that you can say, okay, that's where I draw the line, that's fine. So everyone apparently is drawing this line more narrow, if that makes sense. At least that's my feeling lately than before. And it's coming from two sides. I'm not saying, oh, the CNN listeners do that more than the Fox listeners. And if you're not from the US, that might not say something to you. But most people that are listening to my podcast are from the US, and they completely understand what I'm talking about, right? So we need to talk. We need to think about these things more. And if you relate this to a normal relationship, and it could be a romantic relationship, there's not any argument solved by staying by your own opinion, right? By staying by your own, or by per se wanting to be right, right? So one of the last teachings that Jesus is doing about when he says, let me say that here again, love one another as I loved you, right? Is he said at some point in time, if you love goes as far as putting your life down for your friend, right? That would be the ultimate love. Lay down love, this life for his friend. That would be an ultimate sacrifice, right? Now, maybe you don't have to go that far, right? But it is always about sacrifice. So what do you, one of the pastors that I'm following, Ryan Leake, you can follow him. He's always preaching at Chase Oak Church here in Allen, Texas. So find him. It's an interesting series that they are right now. But he said, what do we need to lay down to build someone up? So can we give up on the fact that we always wanted to be right? Maybe you need to lay down, a part or your complete career, if that, and I can talk to all these things myself, by the way, because I have been for a while always be the person that wanted to be right, and sometimes I had so many arguments that I felt that I was right, but I lost the relationship in the process. So maybe it's not so important to be always right? So I used to say, man, if they cannot prove that I'm wrong, then I must be right. I mean, that sounds, again, like a good thing to do, but I don't think it is, right? There was also a time that I was so consumed by my career and I should have laid down maybe a part of that career. No one forced me to do that. I did it myself, right? Maybe I should lay down a little bit of that career, on the behalf of the love that I had, which was my family. Does that make sense? Now, some things you cannot turn back, but you can definitely always do better when you go forward, right? And last but not least is, if you think about what Rick Warren said. Rick Warren is also a pastor, and I believe he is even from Texas, but I'm not sure, to be honest. So, but I think all people are from Texas. That's also a joke, by the way. But he says humility isn't thinking less of yourself, although that would be a really good definition, right? If you say, hey, what is the definition of humility? That would be saying, hey, think a little bit less of yourself. I think that's already a good way of describing what humility is. But he takes it actually a step further. As humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less, which is basically, like I said in this talk, I talk a lot about Jesus, because he puts himself aside on behalf of other people. And that was his form of showing love. Now, like I said, you might not have to do that with your life, but maybe it is by giving up that you always need to be right? Maybe it is, like I said, by, you always need to win. Maybe it is by giving up maybe some of your career. In some cases, people need to lay down a little bit of what they truly are passionate about, right? It could be many things, and I'm sure if I think about it long enough, that I'll find things in my life that I need to lay down too, on behalf of love. Does that make sense? So before we go back to that point, like you need to love yourself first, because if you love yourself first, think about it, you're only doing things for self-improvement. Career would be one, arguments and your opinion would be one that you start to perfect. You start to dig yourself deep in your opinion. Love can only be measured through how you love through someone else, and that is true for the other person too. It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. Otherwise it would not be love. Otherwise it would be power, right? So maybe we need to rethink that nowadays, specifically in times where we are divided so quickly due to a political situation, but it's also because of the COVID-19 situation that we are so quickly divided just because someone is not sharing the opinion that you have, right? Okay, so this was Shah from the podcast Thrive, Not Survive After Child Abuse, with episode 35. I'll be back tomorrow for sure with a new episode. Hope that you listen then again. And with that, I'll say bye-bye.